Some other things that are unique to the AP Physics 1 test, there's several question types that are specific to AP Physics 1 and 2. And so one of them is the paragraph length response. So I have here, there's a question about, an oscillator, and there's kind of some wave stuff in here too. The one phrase that I wanted to point out in this is in a clear, coherent paragraph length response. Okay, so there will be a question on every test that is a paragraph length response, and so what they want is a paragraph structure that demonstrates that you understand basically what's going on here. So this is fairly typical in that they'll have some kind of introductory prompt where they'll set up the situation, and then they'll give you kind of a starter question that's worth like 2 out of the 7 points would be for part A. Okay, so here we basically have an oscillator that's oscillating this string and creating these standing waves, but there's a little twist in it too that the AP test likes to do, little twists like that where they take a problem that you've seen before and you definitely know how to do. In this is kind of, I don't think they're going to be covering this topic on this year's test, but in normal times they would usually have a section on waves, right? So you're used to seeing standing waves and stuff, but they'd say, okay, well, what if we have some standing waves, but they're different lengths? Do you understand the physics of that? Do you understand what's going on and why that may be the case? Okay, so the figure above shows a uniformly thick rope hanging vertically from an oscillator that's turned off. So when the oscillator is turned on, instead of a certain frequency, the rope forms the standing wave shown above and right. P and Q are 2 points on the rope. So the tension at point P is greater than the tension at point Q. Briefly explain why. Okay, so you see the twist there. So usually when we do systems, we operate on the assumption that like the tension is the same at every point in the rope, and they're straight up telling us here, okay, no, the tension is not the same at every point in the rope. The tension is different. Why would that be? And so obviously you have to figure out that that's because of gravity and because it's a vertical rope, and especially because there isn't, usually when we do those kinds of problems, there's like a heavy mass at one end, right? And so compared to the mass of a 10 kilogram mass, let's say, the mass of the rope isn't that much. But when our only mass is the rope, then it does make a difference at what point of the rope you are, because you're going to have twice the tension at the bottom as you would at the top, for example. Well, twice the tension at Q as you would at P, let's say. And so then you have to explain that, okay, it's because it's gravity. And then we go into the paragraph length response. And so they want a student hypothesizes that increasing the tension in a rope increases the speed at which the wave travels along the rope, which from what we know about waves, that sounds like an appropriate hypothesis. Okay, in a clear, coherent paragraph length response that may also contain figures and or equations, okay, explain why a standing wave shown above supports the student's hypothesis. So they say it can contain figures or equations, but it cannot be just figures and equations. There's almost always a point simply for writing a paragraph. So even if you write nonsense, you could get at least 1 point just for writing a paragraph, as long as it fits that form. You would not get that point if you're just writing equations and stuff like that. And sometimes they won't even read your response unless it's in the form of a paragraph. So it's very important that you're able to follow those parameters. So let me give you an example of the grading rubric that they would use on this question. So again, like I said, it's usually 2 points for the first prompt and then 5 points for the paragraph. I've seen some where they have just 7 points for the paragraph, but that's very rare. So here they give 1 point for indicating that there is more rope or weight below 1 point than the other. So basically some kind of indication that you're talking about weight. 1 point for indicating explicitly or implicitly. So you don't have to use their exact words is basically what they're getting at there, but you have to somehow imply that the tension at any point counteracts or supports the weight below that point. So basically, if you just talk about how the weight at point Q is less than or is double the weight at point P because there's twice as much rope below, and therefore there's twice as much weight due to gravity, that would get you both of those points. You don't have to use their exact words. and then 5 points for the paragraph. Now for the paragraph, this is probably the I would say the hardest place to get points for most students. It doesn't have to be if you kind of know how to state your point. And again, you don't need to get all 5 points in order to get a 5 on the test, right? You just need to be able to show that you know a bunch of the important concepts that they do. And if you explain yourself in a way that covers the important concepts, I would be very surprised if you don't get 4 out of those 5 points. Like it's fairly common you miss like one little thing. Maybe the grader doesn't see how you hit every single little thing, but your overall grade is going to be good if you make sure you're covering the important concepts. Okay, so in this case, 1 point for indicating that the wavelength is longer near the top of the rope or shorter near the bottom. Okay, so you don't even need to, that isn't even something that you would need to bring in outside knowledge. That's just citing important evidence, right? So you're citing what you're observing in the problem. Okay, so I cite that the wavelength is shorter near the bottom. Okay, so that's indicating that the tension is less at the bottom, as we referred to in part A, and therefore I'm seeing, a shorter, slower wave, shorter wavelength. Okay, for indicating explicitly or implicitly that the frequency is the same throughout the rope. Okay, so explaining that you know that the frequency comes from the generator and not from any other aspect of, nothing about the rope affects the frequency. It's only the oscillator at the top. 1 point for using the wave speed equals wavelength times frequency. So somehow applying that that relationship to show based on what you already know, the things I already mentioned. That okay, so that relationship exists. And a point for indicating explicitly or implicitly that, as stated in part A, tension is greater near the top of the rope. Okay, so you can see that point 1 and point 4 here are very similar together, or very, very close together, right? So, just stating these things, you could get all of these points in maybe like 2-3 sentences, right? Which would qualify as a paragraph. You just have to be very careful. You want to state everything that you know, because it is so open-ended and because you don't know exactly what they're looking for in their points. You want to state everything you don't know. You just want to be careful not to state anything that's false, because if you state things that are false, then you may go backwards. You may lose points, but you want to make sure that you state everything that you know is true, because you could get points on any of it, because they don't necessarily tell you upfront necessarily what you're going to get points for. Okay, so that's the paragraph length response. So I wanted to highlight that there's they give you a point here, right, for sufficient paragraph structure. So what does that mean? Basically, it basically means that there's a paragraph, right? So you would want like introductory sentence, your information, a concluding sentence, and that would be plenty. It doesn't have to be, like a 5-paragraph essay, right? They're not grading you on grammar or spelling or anything like that. It just has to be that you can demonstrate that you are able to reason not just in equations but also in English. Okay, and so if you can do that, then you'll get that point. Even if your physics is completely wrong, you'll still get 1